Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start our event, and I would like to invite for the welcome words on to invite our honorable guests. But before that, a couple of organizational questions. Our shelter, we have a shelter in case of air raid alarm. We will interrupt our event, including broadcast, and we will go down to the shelter. Coffee right next door to us. We have participants live and online. So if you have questions, please raise your hands, let us know. Online participants, please, your comments via a broadcast on our page or on YouTube channel. We accept your questions. And now one more small announcement. Alexander Kubrakov, Deputy Prime Minister for Restoration, is now at the meeting concerning mobilization, but he will join us shortly. But Alexandra Zakhina is with us today. Please, also Katerina Maternova, Ambassador of the EU to Ukraine, Ola Edberg Mikkelsen, Ambassador of the Kingdom of Denmark to Ukraine, and also Roxolana Pidlasa, Head of the Budget Committee of the Verkhovna Rada, MP of Ukraine. Maybe we will have other guests. I will announce them if necessary. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to hold this event. Thank you to the European Union Anti-Corruption Initiative. Thank you to the Ministry, to the NGOs who help us along the way with the transparency, accountability, and recovery. So this is to continue our meeting on September 7. That was organized within the framework of the restoration of Ukraine, and we today will show the results of the research conducted by the Basel Institute for Governance, and we will talk about our vision of the future of this fund and other funds that have as the basis three advances that we've achieved through this fund. The throughout and thorough digitalization that allows for transparency and accountability. Secondly, opportunity for communities to submit their projects to finance restoration. Before, we haven't had such an initiative, and we formed it with the ministry to allow for the funding of the restoration. And thirdly is the use of the independent methodology, and the colleagues and experts will talk about it today. But it's important for us to have this component of presentations, but also the live discussion, because on the one hand we already have achievements and advances in Ukraine that testify to the possibility of using donor resources and plan the system and see the system in one single format. Together with that, we understand that a lot of challenges are forwarded to us by a Ukraine facility, and of course with our technological digital advances are not enough if we talk about a specific understanding of common priorities and common tasks and how we are going to fulfill them. Therefore, I'm wishing you all fruitful cooperation, and we hope that Alexander Kubrakov will join us shortly to our meeting. Thank you, Alexander. We would like to invite you to the second panel, and now I would like to give the floor to Her Excellency Katerina Maternova, Ambassador of the EU to Ukraine.
My Ukrainian teacher told me that you can say dobrovo ranku, but then you have to say dobrý deň. So I'm going to choose to follow my teacher's advice and say dobrý deň. You know, over the last year and a half, there has been almost a cottage industry outside of Ukraine to have panels on and conferences on Ukraine reconstruction, and many of them had the theme of accountability and how are we going to make sure that all the billions and billions and billions of euros, dollars, yen, other currencies coming into the country are not going to be stolen, misappropriated, etc. And I was always kind of wondering, well, let's maybe first make sure that money arrives and that the reconstruction resources are actually going to be effectively spent. And I sort of always thought of a triad that one needs to keep in mind when talking about resources for reconstruction. That's effectiveness, transparency, and impact. And in fact, this is the first panel on reconstruction I'm taking place in my new capacity as the EU ambassador in Ukraine. And this is actually an appropriate place, and it's an appropriate time to talk about how to address reconstruction. Even before the huge amounts of resources come, the systems need to be set up. The procedures need to be thought about. Whether it's a fund, whether it's part of the budget, it needs to work. It needs to be transparent, but it also needs to be effective and sufficiently flexible. I'm delighted that it's actually our project, and I'm looking at the project leader Alan sitting in the front row, that has been accompanying Ukraine over the last number of years on its difficult but a road that is showing results, and that is to bring transparency into public life and fight with the hydra of corruption. We are now discussing a third iteration of this project. We are doing it, the EU, together with one of the key member states that are looking after transparency in public life, Denmark, and we are going to have the third iteration. So there is really a continuation of paying attention to it. I would like to say that we have collectively contributed quite a bit to both the build-up of the anti-corruption institutions, as well as to helping programs such as Prozoro, etc., come to life, and also have contributed a lot to the advocacy for anti-corruption, because this is an area that Ukraine is on particularly close scrutiny about. I'm very happy to say that there are now even opinion polls that show not only that fighting corruption has floated to the top of the public's agenda, which creates then pressure on the system, on the authorities, etc., but there are actually acknowledgement, according to a recent poll published in early October, that there is recognition that things have been moving in the right direction. And I'm a strong believer in that. Let's not forget that painting Ukraine as one of the most corrupt countries in the world is one of the most widely spread and utilized Russian narrative, and which is completely overdone, but nevertheless it is very effective. And so just to say that the reconstruction of Ukraine, which is not going to start on a specific day, there is a continuum, because there is already a lot of infrastructure that needs to be rebuilt. All of us are a bit uneasy and worried about what the next few weeks and months will bring with the Russians liking to strike when the weather is cold and when the situations get tough. So there is actually a lot of the work that's already happening, and I'm delighted that the project that we together support can work with the ministry to help organize the processes for the future in a way that will breed trust and believe in the system. And I hope that the discussion today will be an important contribution to this debate.
Дякуємо, Катерина.
Thank you, Katerina. And now I would like to give the floor to His Excellency, Ambassador of the Kingdom of Denmark to Ukraine, Ole Egbert Mikkelsen.
Honored to be on this distinguished panel, and thank you for inviting me for this occasion, and thank you for taking the initiative to address the thorny issue of corruption in the context of Ukraine's reconstruction head-on, because we need to talk about corruption. We cannot eradicate corruption without talking about it. And this is very timely because in most capitals, at least in my own, there's a lot of focus on reconstruction and recovery of Ukraine at this point in time. And I can tell you, because we have ministers here almost every week, and I spend quite some time with them in the car, and what are they bringing up? What is the main concern when we're talking about reconstruction? That's corruption. And this is because perception is reality. And I agree with you, Madam Ambassador, that this is not the reality. A lot of progress has been made, but as long as perception is that is this working? Yeah, now it is. So I think it's a very timely initiative, because this conference will send a strong signal to your partners that this is a problem that will be tackled. This will be handled adequately and efficiently. And Denmark has a special interest in this because, as some of you might know, we have assumed the patronage for the rebuilding and reconstruction of the city and the oblast of Mykolaiv. This was a long story. I'll spare you for the details, but this was presented. This was a suggestion by President Zelensky when he spoke to our parliament back in March 2022 at the darkest hour of the Russian aggression, he urged Denmark to assume the patronage for the rebuilding of the city of heroes, as he said. And the initial reaction was actually quite hesitant, because there were voices saying, well, that's a bit risky. We're not normally doing this. We should do this through multinational institution. And what would be the expectations? Would there be an expectation that we should finance everything? And what about national cohesion? And what about national priorities? How could they be taken into consideration? There was also worries about the security situation, because at that time, as you know, the city of Mykolaiv was under daily shelling, and life was, I can tell you, not easy down there. But last but not least, the main worry was actually corruption. Some were saying that by assuming the patronage, we would, for the reconstruction process, we would be directly exposed to the risk of corruption. It would be less risky, some people are saying, if we give the money to multinational institutions and they assume the risk. So there were many arguments against this patronage, but our Prime Minister, who came to Kiev just 1 month after the speech of President Zelensky, was very clear in his decision. She said, we cannot wait for peace and a big plan. We need to start supporting reconstruction right now. And this is what the President of Ukraine has asked us to do, it, and we will do it. And work started immediately, and we bought enormous quantities of plywood and particle board to board off windows. About 80 water stations were established, because the Russians had cut off the water supply. So there were many practical issues, and so basically the first task was to make the city ready for the winter. And thanks to a very efficient and seamless cooperation with local and regional authorities, this actually went well, and the city became ready for the winter. Now we had then a visit by our Prime Minister. She came to Mykolaiv in late January. She met with the president there, and they were happy about what they saw. And now they decided to move to the next phase, focusing on reconstruction of social and physical infrastructure, and not least bringing back economic life, because this was this was the biggest wish from the local and the regional authorities, but also from national authorities, because it's an enterprising city. They want to earn their own money. They're not interested in handout. They want to earn their own money. And this turned out to be very difficult because no lenders, neither Ukrainian banks or international financial institutions would lend any money to local enterprises, because they said it's too risky. So we had to establish our own facility in our export credit agency, where export credits and loan guarantees could be issued even to companies close to the front line. And this has actually worked well now. Some of the enterprises are getting back in business, creating jobs and opportunities, and people as they are starting to pay taxes. So all in all, we're happy with this partnership, even though it is risky. But what about corruption? Because, as I said, this was the main worry, and we know this is a real risk, and this is my worst nightmare, that suddenly we would have headlines saying that there is a corruption scandal in the city of Mykolaiv. So we have taken a number of steps to mitigate the risk and to try to minimize it. First of all, we're doing almost all procurement through international competitive bidding, mainly through the UN procurement agency called UNOPS. This is a bit more cumbersome, but we eliminate at least the risk in terms of procurement. We're also working a lot through international and Danish humanitarian organizations, so we're not doing anything on the ground ourselves, and this is also working well. And secondly, Mykolaiv became one of the so-called integrity cities, which is part of the EU ACI program, and this works well, I can tell you, because I come there quite often. The mayor and his team are strongly committed. And actually the anti-corruption advisor that has been seconded is sitting just next to the mayor, and this, I think, is a sign that this is a high priority. And there's also a well-functioning municipal audit office that works well, and there are also local media that are actually following how money are being spent, and I'm encouraging them to do that, even though that it might be a problem for myself one day if they discover something. But we try to work with the local checks and balances that can be applied. And thirdly, we have established a joint Ukrainian-Danish steering committee with Deputy Prime Minister Kubakov as a member, together with the Danish Minister for Development, and they're both co-chairs. The mayor and the governor and the head of the regional council are also members of the steering committee, and this ensures that there is transparency about what is happening, because what we're doing down there needs to fit well into national priorities, and I know that our friends in the Ministry of Restoration are following this very closely. And actually on Monday we're going to have our meeting in Mykolaiv in the steering committee. And finally and fourthly, we have established an embassy office in Mykolaiv, so we'll have boots on the ground. We'll have a colleague and a local team being present in Mykolaiv, because it's a long journey. It's difficult to have oversight and following what is going on. So we're trying to do what we can to mitigate the risk, but we are and we feel very assured that by the strong commitment by the local and regional leadership, we have done what we can to mitigate the risk. So this is what we're doing. We know there is a risk. We hope that we have been able to mitigate it, at least for the time being.
Дякуємо дуже.
Thank you very much. We all appreciate, I think, support coming from the EU and specific national players and their programs. But when we discuss finance, we also discuss the national budget of Ukraine with all its contributors. Sorry. So now Anastasia Radina. Sorry. Roxolana. I was thinking about corruption. Roxolana Pidlaza, head of the Budget Committee of the Parliament of Ukraine. Thank you very much. I'm going to speak English and I'm going to speak budget.
And I was told that I have to tell about and I have to discuss at this very conference financial aspects of renovation. And I would like to apologize in advance for the fact that my welcome speech is not going to be upbeat or inspirational, because frankly there is... Hello. There are very few inspirational things in the state budget of 2024. We're looking at the voting in the parliament next week. We know that it will remain the budget of war. Every month we will spend the amount of our pre-war expenditures solely for the objectives of military defense. And everything Ukraine earns in taxes, customs duties, privatization and domestic borrowing is used for defense needs. None of our partners, including the European Union, agreed to finance army directly, and we rigorously adhere to this rule. The annual defense expenditures will rise to almost $52 billion this year. This means that we constantly look for ways to increase domestic income. We are intent on redirecting part of physical income tax from local budgets to the state budget. We plan a twofold increase of private income tax for banks. Finally, unfortunately, we must temporarily disassemble state road fund that may result in subpar winter maintenance. But we do not have that many options at the moment. IMF expects us to decrease international borrowing plan by $4 billion for 2024 and cover this chunk of deficit with domestic borrowing and increased domestic income, which may or may not be possible because we do not know. The political situation is a bit unstable at the moment and you can never tell what the MPs in the parliament will or will not vote for. Which is why financing and any kind of construction and renovation will be very challenging in 2024. This year we managed to use nationalized Russian assets and parts of National Bank's net income to finance reconstruction. Next year, in line with IMF recommendation, National Bank of Ukraine will contribute their net income to the general fund of the budget, and that means this money will be used for defense expenditures. And the value of seized Russian assets is yet to be determined at open auctions, and the security situation does not help the privatization auctions and does not help investments in Ukrainian nationalized enterprises, as you may understand. This leads us to growing reliance on international funding for reconstruction. At least $700 million we shall use for compensations to people who lost their homes because of Russian aggression, let alone social infrastructure. And the Ministry of Renovation, the Minister Kubrakov and the government in general are looking for ways to finance that for 2024. On our side, in the Parliament and in the Budget Committee, we will continue to focus our efforts on building transparent and accountable system of funding renovation. Right after the budget vote in the Parliament, we will commence a working group on the law to reform the Accounting Chamber of Commerce of Ukraine. And I will appreciate if all our international partners delegated their experts to participate in this working group and contribute your vision. Especially I'd like to ask Madam Ambassador to delegate Jenny over there into our working group because she's been great. Thank you. And well, that being said, Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for coming, and I hope that this conference today will forward our joint work on renovation legislation, especially in the part of auditing and monitoring renovation efforts.
Пані Роксолана, дуже дякуємо. Слова важкі, слова...
Thank you very much. It's hard to utter such words, but it is necessary, a necessary pain. We have to revisit the European standards by way of compliance, and Vice Prime Minister Alexander Kubrakov is with us. Dear colleagues, thank you very much, and sorry for being late. I had a military council to hold, literally speaking, and we understand some things, but a spade should be called a spade, as the saying goes. It sounds strange to me when we say the road fund, great needs, we understand. Let's be frank there. This road fund, at least 50% of it could have been left alone, because 1/4 will go to paying interest for the loans from the World Bank, EIB, the history interest, and the road building cannot be stopped. Let's decide that in winter we'll be using money from the reserve fund. We could have kept 50% of the said funds, prohibits capital expenditures, understanding the state of play, and that would have been a wise decision, because if we want some business to invest with 2-year, 3-year contracts in new equipment, financial leasing, they should see some sustainable mechanisms still working. This is one thing. Secondly, procedures. We're talking about transparency and accountability. Those procedures are related to the reserve fund and road fund, two different kettles of fish, so to speak. And if we discuss this thing, it's this thing. Let me tell you that the amount is not going to change. The amount of money to be spent by the state for servicing the sovereign debt and maintenance of the roads of national importance. This is the same kind of money, but the procedures are to be changed. And if we are talking about that, let's consider that there are several options, and let's not be deceitful with ourselves, because this is a story which is obvious. This reserve fund is a totally different procedure. Now the liquidation fund. Very shortly, let me tell you that in fact this year, well, in fact, this year, lots of things have been done. The correct infrastructure has been constructed that makes it possible, after all the checks and involvements, 80% of the project initiated by local communities, everything was transparent, everything was online, the agenda would be formed with all the stakeholders involved. NGOs concerned with corruption, combating corruption. I think this is an achievement in its own right for this year, for this part, and I would like this to be preserved, maintained, retained as much as we can. That should be reflected in the law, embedded rather. And we've discussed that with the professional community, with the general public representatives, and starting from mid-November, we will have the first draft for the bill in question. And that was my second point. Now, about the system called DREAM. It is being developed, and the projects are being supplied, and all the projects funded from the liquidation fund this year, by all means, will go into DREAM. And secondly, that was the technique for selection of the project. It's the only one, it's a fair one, and everything that would use some backdoor would be substantiated. Military facilities related to some military needs and one or two facilities, in fact, this year with all the necessary documents to support that decision. The rest of the crowd would all go through the procedure. And another story, let me discuss it with you. There are many things being discussed. The Ukrainian plan, we understand the difficulty, the formidable nature of it for partners on our side, for the Ministry of Finance, for the government, for the whole team. And let me tell you, as an aside, that this infrastructure, if it is Pillar 1, Pillar 2, this is being discussed for recovery. This is focused on the reconstruction process to be open, to be accountable, and for all the results that we plan to receive and achieve, I would like to thank all the partners who contributed to creation of this mechanism, the Danish government, the EU Commission, the European Commission. But this is a ready-made infrastructure. What we are talking about here is for this fund, this special fund in the structure of the budget, to be used, and it will be used for recovery. Thank you very much for everything.
Дякую, Олександре.
Thank you, Alexander. I would like to go deeper into this discussion and what Roxolana has started and what you said about the communities and decentralization, but unfortunately we have limited time, so I would like to invite Olena Shulak, head of the Committee for the Organization of the State Power, Local Self-Government. And good day, dear colleagues. I would like to first of all thank you, our international partners, for the support of the processes targeted at recovery of our country, of rebuilding our strong communities, and for the support of each and every project that influences and supports the life and development of our communities. I would like to say that it was our committee that was defined as the main committee, policy forming committee in terms of recovery. And I would like to share some important things for us, because we think that there should be some principles if we talk about integrity, accountability, and also openness of all the processes in recovery. Currently, we observe active processes concerning the compensations mechanism, because now all the citizens whose housing was damaged or destroyed can receive via the new mechanism the compensation for damaged or destroyed property, namely housing. I am one of the authors of this draft law, and together with the Ministry for Restoration and Ministry for Digital Transformation, we managed to do two important things. First of all, we set up the Unified State Register for damaged and destroyed property. Currently, this is the only register containing all the verified information concerning all the damages, whether it's housing, apartments, or private houses. It contains all the information about the damaged or destroyed infrastructure, and also information on not only public but private and municipal sectors and the damages sustained by them. Hopefully it will become the basis for the reparations from the Russian Federation. And now we have 239,000 objects entered in the register, and over 100,000 such objects are the houses, and this register is the digital basis for compensation mechanisms for damaged or destroyed property. Together with our colleagues, we managed to create a mechanism where a person that receives compensation receives it personally in hands, not via some recommendations or intermediaries where this person has to spend this money, or where they should exchange their certificate. When we set up this mechanism, we referred to the research from our international partners, and we knew that there are corruption risks if there are no direct payments. So direct payments via digital tools were the basis for a successful launch of this mechanism. This week we had a meeting with the representatives of the committee, the European Parliament. There were our colleagues from the Committee for Regional Development. We talked a lot about this initiative concerning the compensation, and they said that it was extremely important for them to see our Ukrainian government presenting this initiative up for discussion, because it can be used in other countries, because natural disasters happen all across the world, and this anti-corruption mechanisms with such progressive digital elements could be a successful basis also for other countries. What I want to mention next is the DREAM system. We are now actively working on in the parliamentary committees to set up legal framework to make this system obligatory for all the communities. We are now seeing the DREAM system transforming itself. It's also can be a bank of national ideas, and it could be used as best practice, and everybody sees everything, and it's important in all the processes connected to recovery. And lastly, I want to mention this initiative that comes under discussions quite often. It was discussed in the Budget Committee. It wasn't supported, but I think that we laid the grounds for discussions. All our projects connected to recovery were financed via the fund of the liquidation of the elimination of the consequences of armed aggression. No active work is stipulated, but now we hope that these compensation mechanisms, we see the family receiving these compensations, and this work will continue for Ukrainians who will have their own housing. People left their homes because the war started, and this is the task for the state to resolve. And we suggested the National Fund for Recovery that could work permanently for all under a martial law. And of course it can be set up at the level of the budget code of Ukraine, similar to how other funds worked. A good example of the use of from the State Road Fund, and which proved its effectiveness. This fund must be part of the state budget. It cannot be a separate legal entity, and all the principles of it, the work of the state budget, will be preserved and used. This is about the final decision allocating the funds for national recovery. It must be taken by this decision must be taken by the cabinet of ministers. But again, the working group, as it is stipulated by the work of the fund of the elimination, is responsible, and a ministry could perform these oversight functions, and also in terms of midterm planning. Of course, we plan that this fund, to make it comprehensive and sustainable, again, we were talking about the assets of the Russian Federation, and all the rules for the use of such funds must be fulfilled in terms of quarterly or maybe monthly reports concerning the fulfillment of the national budget of Ukraine. And we hope that the possibility of setting up such a fund would be discussed and realized in our discussion today. And I'm convinced that our international partners, experts, and our lawmaking body will all be able to arrive at a consensus decision that will result in solid financing principles for the recovery of Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you, Elena. Now we will have a discussion as to how to ensure the effective functioning of the fund. We will call it Fund 2.0. And now I would like to thank Mr. Alexander Kubrakov, Her Excellency Katerina Maternova, His Excellency Ole Ekberg Mikkelsen, Roxana Pidlasa, and Elena Shulak for Anastasia Radina unfortunately did not join us. She unfortunately fell ill, so hopefully Roxana Pidlasa and Elena Shulak covered the position of the Parliament and the committees for us to understand the policy of the Parliament in terms of recovery. Thank you all for your welcome words, for your speeches, and for the assistance of the European Union and Denmark. And now I invite to the discussion on the Fund 2.0, the presentation of the results of the research. Mustafa Nayem, head of the State Agency for Restoration and Infrastructure. Yuhani Grossman will be together with us online, Basin Institute on Governance. Head of the Green Corruption Initiative, Irina Kovalenko, senior legal expert, Alexandra Azarkina, Deputy Minister for Communities, Territories, Mr. Ellen Pak Christensen, head of the EU ACI in Ukraine, host of our meeting. I would ask you to, taking into account our agenda and our timing, if you don't mind, if Mustafa Nayem wouldn't mind to have his presentation first. So now we will see this presentation. To help now, Yuhani Grossman, the research of the current situation, Basel Institute on Governance. I hope you can hear me.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here at this discussion, although I wish I was there live with you, but we will work with what we have, unfortunately. I have already left up from my last trip. So first of all, thank you for having me and in this discussion. And I wanted to highlight that the study that we conducted, very in close cooperation with Iwachi and Irina, and in fact we're sort of presenting together. I'm presenting our findings and she's presenting the solutions. I think it's important to stress that as we were doing our interviews, as we were doing our document review, we really found a tremendous amount of commitment from all the staff involved in it, tremendous amount of commitment in rolling out these 300 projects, picking the best ones, and improving their quality as we went along. So and nowhere in our study, in our interviews, that we hear or see any accusations of corruption or anything like that. Nonetheless, we are corruption experts, so we always have to find some ways to improve things. And so today I'll try to talk about that a little bit, and I hope you can see my presentation. So first of all, we looked at the liquidation fund very closely. We conducted a whole bunch of documentary reviews and interviews. And we tried to see where are the potential areas that could be vulnerable to corruption. So we're not investigating actual corruption. We're looking at areas where there could be risks or there could be a perception of it. I should also state clearly that we did not look at any military objects that might be funded through the fund, and we did not look at the project design phase. So we started our review when the projects arrive at the ministry for review. And then, of course, DREAM, as Deputy Prime Minister Kubrakov already mentioned, is a crucial element here, and I'm sure we'll talk about it separately. It also wasn't part of our review because DREAM wasn't an active part of the system back during the first 2 rounds that we reviewed. And so there are sort of 7 points broadly that we wanted to highlight. Again, none of these are acute concerns, but they are items that probably should be considered in whatever format funding for reconstruction happens in the future. And so the first is, as is normal for any new system, there was a whole lot of communication back and forth between the communities, the hromadas, as they were designing projects and then submitting them. Perfectly understandably, perfectly normal for a new fund to have these kind of exchanges. Now, these exchanges were done in a very informal way. There was typically by telephone, so there were no records of those. And that leaves a certain amount of subjectiveness or potential risks of being perceived as treating unfair. Who receives how much help in improving their project? And so our suggestion here is that these kind of support mechanisms should be traceable and accountable, fairly straightforward. The second point that we wanted to raise is the role of the line ministries. Now, the line ministries, of course, play 2 roles. They have their own projects that they submit, and they're also at a stage review projects that are coming in. So here, the first suggestion we have is that those 2 roles should be clearly separated, so there isn't the perceived sense by hromadas, for example, who have their projects rejected for a technical reason, that line ministries are doing that in order to save funds for their own project. So that must be clearly articulated. The other element here is that the requirements and the criteria with which line ministries reject projects are not, or were at that time, not completely articulated in great detail. So again, that's perfectly normal for a new fund and something that should probably be considered as we move forward. Then the third point pertains to the working group. And here the question is primarily about projects that might not be selected through the methodology. I understand that Yevgen is going to talk about the methodology, which together with DREAM, from our perspective, are the 2 silver bullets to address corruption risks in the reconstruction process. So whatever form the reconstruction funding takes place, it should definitely take into account those 2 corruption slayers, DREAM and the methodology. And if we lose those, it would be really an awful shame. So here the question primarily to the working group is, when they pick projects or suggest projects that are outside the methodology, how is that handled? So these exceptions, non-methodology projects. And so there's a few suggestions that we make here. One is that there would be a certain predefined amount of the budget for reconstruction that is assigned for high priority projects, and the Kakhovka Dam, for example, is one that gets cited again and again. That is clear in advance to all participants, so there is a reduced fungibility and subjectivity in this process, and that the vast majority of projects are in fact funded through the automatic algorithm of the methodology. The other point here, of course, is that these special projects, that high priority projects selected outside of the methodology, should also absolutely be included in the DREAM system. And where it is at all possible, it would be good to have a sort of a period of public review between the identification and the picking of the project. I think this is the 5th point, if I recall correctly. So there is a question, again, at the working group level about the criteria for selecting or not selecting projects. And 2 examples here are the requirement for co-financing and the requirement that the object is included in the program for comprehensive restoration. Our understanding is that those criteria are not hard. They were not hard in the last rounds. And so it's probably good to clarify if it's a deal breaker, for example, to have co-financing, and what the objective, in fact, of the co-financing requirement is. Is it saving money? Is it indication that they're serious about it? And to communicate those clearly. So there's sort of a range, if you will, that where those requirements can be set, and we think it would be good to make it clear to participants how tough those rules should be. Then about the role of the Parliamentary Budget Committee. So here I think there was, we should say out front sort of a caveat that we were not able to look at this in great detail. Obviously, parliamentary oversight is important. So instead of clear recommendations, we're making maybe giving some food for thought, some considerations. And so here, a big question is whether projects are reviewed on an individual level, pass fail, or whether in fact there is sort of a slate improvement or improvement of a methodology or concepts more broadly. And our feeling is, from an anti-corruption perspective, it would be much better if we're not looking at individual project approval, because there's certain risks associated with that. Finally, we're talking about community engagements. And so here we wanted to just highlight the fact that based on the interviews that we conducted, it's clearly a learning curve, a steep learning curve for Hromadas to design solid projects. Some have taken the step of hiring specific proposal writers to help with these. Others really struggle with it, and so whatever efforts we take, they will clearly require a lot of public education at the Hromada level, so they're able to adhere to the requirements. And I'll probably leave it at that. Just to say that we also looked at the control systems that are in place already. And here we found that on the prevention side, there were quite a few systems already in place. And of course, Ukraine, the fund and Ukraine in general benefits from perhaps one of the most sophisticated anti-corruption systems in the world. So the question is just how to apply these tools to restoration funds as well. So we found that on the prevention side, there were quite solid systems in place. What wasn't quite clarified yet was if there was any accused wrongdoing, if there was an accusation of corruption, if there was a whistleblowing complaint, how would these be handled in regards to the fund and restoration funds? So this is an item we think that's important to clarify as a feedback loop should the prevention tools fail. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I hope I didn't take too much time, and look forward to the rest of the discussion.
У нас з онлайна. Мене чути? Чути. У нас з онлайну також.
You can hear us, I suppose, from the chat box of our online arrangement. We have a certain question. Here's the question from the chat box. We are talking about improvement of the reconstruction system, restoration system, how to make the centralized, how to put it right, to cut a long story short, how to make it efficient and effective. And there are certain claims from the general staff that we are entering this war of attrition that is here to stay for a considerable amount of time. So this is the dilemma. This is it. I know the answer to this question, but is it it? Is it it? Mustafa Naim is head of State Agency for Restoration and Infrastructure Development. Let me try to answer the question how to employ the money and for what? Prioritization of projects and the policy making. Well, speaking of the part how they use the funds, it doesn't matter where the money comes from. I mean, for the agency, we are a spending agency in a regular way, and at this point of policy making, which is about restoration and funding, the agency is the last chain in terms of implementation. We are the end user and implementer and beneficiary of such works. And we are having this discussion in a different circle, but governmentally, so to speak. the money should be spent in a transparent fashion, but the national money, international money. But I keep asking, what about international funds? National funds versus international. So we can steal our own money and be transparent and fair with the international funds. It's about the openness of the procedure, transparency and posting. Well, with the national money, we can make excuse for the donors. We have to present a beautiful story. It doesn't matter what kind of money comes to the end user, because the disbursement should be just right. Now about employment of these funds, of this money or these funds, and distribution among the implementing partners. So there's this great instrument that was invented a long time ago, and not by us, but it is being implemented in Ukraine, has been since a long time. It's called bidding, competition, tender, and this is about democracy. Democracy is when people come to a ballot station to cast a vote, and many dictators became presidents or leaders in that way. So this is not in itself a guarantee of integrity in the outcomes of this process. The process requires certain prerequisites. Speaking of voting, this should be free media, free country, free access for the political parties, to the voters, to the voting process. Speaking of procurements and construction, the principal goal is to set the criteria for selection and qualifying for the contractors. A fair play and a comprehensive and crucial for everyone. It's not about using technical specifications as excuses and requirements for certain technical characteristics, and people can be intimidated or pressed for certain things, and then the war starts. A different war and scandals in the media and clashes and attacks. The principal cause is the lack of uniformity in requirements to contractors. This is a disaster in its own right. In our agency, we are trying to correct that. All our services in the country have one methodology and one recommendation for the tenders or tender procedure. It doesn't matter which region. Every person responsible for the cost estimate for the procurement know the conditions to a T. And if they have this red line, red flag, there is a call, and there is this nightmare from the point of view of our procurement people here in Kyiv. And this is the right story, and when business comes to us, it doesn't matter where you go. Zhytomyr, Donetsk region, Kharkiv region, Transcarpathia, you have the same uniform requirements for all. And we developed the set of requirements with the international partners, EIB among them, EBRD among them, World Bank, the Ministry for Economy, and most importantly, there's this technique of anti-monopoly committee to see how the abuse had happened for many years preceding that. And now I would like to share this dream. I'm sure if we have such uniform conditions for all the contractors and for all the beneficiaries, for the state administrations, local self-governments, central agencies, this construction and civil works will have a totally different mode, and will get the real contractors, not some fraudsters or some semi-professionals, and that we will have conditions. Conditions present the principal token of transparency for such tenders. Now, speaking of selection of projects and designs, the use of such money, where the money is spent, this is a different story, because we are in the system of coordinates where simultaneously we have decision-making from the local self-governments and priority setting or wish list. Decentralization should be respected, local self-governance and self-governance, but this is not the issue. The real issue is that we have to be objective and frank with ourselves, at least, and with the public for that matter, the partners. We have to be straight. Local self-governance bodies cannot always take decisions just because they wish so, or they will. And they are doing their own thing. We appreciate and respect that. But if they're spending the national money, money belonging to the nation, the money coming from abroad, but we'll have to repay all that with the interest on the loans. So it means that there should be some coordination. This is reason number one. And the reason number two, unfortunately, local self-governance bodies, and it's a normal thing, it's a cool thing, are very egotistic in protecting their interests. But their egotistic interest can be to the detriment of a neighboring region or neighboring community who would like to do the same. I have given you this example. We run 2 schools in 2 regions. One is necessary, another is unnecessary. The other is unnecessary. And whoever interferes with that, no matter how wise or professional, somebody will be pointing fingers at somebody else. One community telling that, sorry, this is not a base school. You will have school buses, and that school is to be a base school with more expertise, better teachers, and it is going to provide more services. One of the communities is going to be dissatisfied. And this is a normal story, normal discussion. So this is not the issue about dissatisfaction, it's about objectivity. Now, what do we have to do that? With that, the Ministry of Restoration, since the very beginning, I'm not talking about the on-the-ground special project institutionally. The best story is methodology. This is how we identify the project. Alexander is going to discuss that, I hope, as intensively and as quickly as I do. And, because without criteria, it is impossible. We talk about the outcomes, why this is there and that is not, and who is responsible for the gaps and shortage. Now, speaking of restoration, let me discuss our agency here. I'm very happy that we have, after 8 months since creation of the agency and our operations, it's not a matter of pride, but it is in normalcy. None of the project has ever had any public scandals or non-public scandals, criminal investigation or proceedings instituted. So we got rid of some people. We had our own conclusions. The most important thing being that we can see that trust in the governmental agency as a beneficiary is much higher now, and I would like this status to be preserved and even promoted further in procurement and spendings and the internal procedures. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry for being a bit slow in my discussion. Our experts have to reach the second panel now. We have another expert discussion. Alexandra Zarkhina, now that Mustafa and I am, well, and Irina Kovalenko. Well, Mustafa has presented the analysis. And now let's come to recommendations. So Irina Kovalenko, senior legal expert, head of the Integrity Support Group for Support of Integrity, EUACI. And how will we improve that for the 2.0 version? We have to show the presentation. Let me speak my English, which is very good, I believe. But let me, by way of introducing this, say a couple words about the ideal, universal, versatile way for the projects to be subjected to choose the best project.
So that everyone, I see that the majority in this hall, they are listening to English version, so I will continue in English. I will try to be brief so that we had more time for our conversation and debate. So I will present on the next couple of slides what we call a universal process for selecting for budget financing and management of a single project pipeline. So what does it mean? This means that the process I will describe further can be applied to any budget facility, any budget instrument that will be used for recovery, as a liquidation fund, national recovery fund, or any other budget program that will be used for financing recovery in Ukraine. Based on our review of the existing practice, we divided all processes inside the liquidation fund or the fund into two big baskets. The first basket is the regular expenditures. That are those planned expenditures for recovery that can be projected and can be combined into some single planned project pipeline. The other part of current expenditures, the liquidation fund, is the emergency expenditures. Those expenditures in the normal situation when we are in the post-war, maybe they will not be so important, but currently as we have a constant shelling of Ukrainian energy and the housing, those there is a constant need to respond and the very timely respond to those big damages to Ukrainian infrastructure and housing. And I will talk about this emergency procedure a little bit later because it is a kind of simplified procedure as compared to the regular baskets. Now we will focus on the regular basket because it is the major part of the fund's funding, and this is what we focus on currently. The four main pillars of the regular procedure is a full digitalization so that everyone can see everything and all information is in one place in the DREAM ecosystem. The decentralization, so we take into account the needs from the local authorities, and we are doing planning bottom-up in terms of the fund. Prioritization as a basic requirement for selecting the projects, and further accountability of those projects that were selected for financing, and we need to see how the funds is used and that they are used in an efficient manner. We determined 16, I can't switch the slide, not sure whether it works. So we have identified 16 basic steps from the announcement of the project selection and up to the project completion. The majority of the steps you can see. Colleagues, I'm not sure that it's the final version you're showing now. Please look PDF. Yeah, because you're showing the, well, it is moving up and down, up and down. The number and the quality of recommendations. Yeah, so so we have those 16 basic steps, and you will see the majority of the steps are digitalized so that the human factor is minimized to the most possible extent. So the first step, it is a new step. Currently the procedure does not prescribe this step, but it is important to address those issues with the informal consultations Juhani raised before. So the first step, Ministry announces that we are going to select projects. And this announcement should clearly identify which projects we are selecting, in which timetable, and if there are any specifics of the current selection process. Because, you know, in the first two rounds, there are some misunderstandings between applicants and the ministry on some eligibility criteria, on the shelters, and so on. So these should be clearly announced in advance. After that, we recommend to have some sort of rounds of public consultations, question and answer sessions, so that each applicant has access to the same information, so that everyone can get consultations and get explanations how to treat the law and how to correctly apply it for this particular cycle. And the results of such consultation should be presented further as a Q&As or some guidelines recommendations, so that everyone was on the same page in understanding of the process. Then, well, project registration, project submission, two key principles, fully digitalized, and the owners of the recovery objects apply by themselves directly to the fund. This allows to exclude the oblast military administration from the process. This will streamline the process and make it more transparent. The DREAM system can automatically pre-filter the applications to ensure that the applications that are incomplete or those applications, projects that do not correspond to the basic requirements of the fund, they do not get the financing and do not get to the further prioritization. And what one of the important eligibility criteria would like to draw your attention to is the alignment with the recovery program documents. Juhani told that in the first cycles it was like a soft requirement, and we believe that for the 2024 and onwards, this requirement should become mandatory because the recovery should become a planned process. All projects that were submitted within the deadline, they undergo prioritization, so they get the prioritization score, and the projects that got the high score, they will be recommended for financing. It is important that one step that we're missing in the current procedure is setting the budget constraint, so the maximum amount of funding which can be allocated within the specific project selection cycle. And what Juhani also mentioned, we recommend to predetermine some specific amounts for each basket within the regular procedure. The prioritized projects, they are reviewed by the ministry, and the long list, short list, and the results of this review are sent to working group. The working group reviews the projects, and if they have any suggestion to exclude or include any projects, that must provide their comments in written form, and these comments should be well substantiated. The next one is the working group meeting. Here we suggest to legalize the existing practice of public broadcasting of the meeting. Moreover, a mandatory requirement should be put that all materials and decisions of the working group, they must be made public without any delay, so that the full transparency is ensured. The slide describes a sequence of steps and issues that should be considered by the working group, but I would like to draw only for one point, that if there were any suggestion from the sectoral ministries to include or exclude some projects from the prioritized list, short list, each specific suggestion should be clearly discussed as a working group and approved or disapproved. Otherwise, the project should not get to the final list of the project of the Cabinet of Ministers. The final list of projects approved by the government, that as it currently is. And after that, the selected project get their funding and start implementation. And Mustafa told us a lot about the issues the project face at the implementation stage. One additional step which we're missing in the current procedures: increase or decrease of financing. The new regulations will clearly describe those processes and determine the criteria when an applicant can apply for an increase or decrease. This slide describes the reporting. I said that it is important that the project implementers were accountable. I would like to raise your attention to one point only, that we suggest moving from preparing some formal reports to regular updates of information in the DREAM system, so that all information on the project is in one place. This allows for further monitoring of this of the project implementation by the ministry, by the civil society, or whatever. All stakeholders can see in one place all information about the project. Monitoring, very important procedure. comprehensive system of monitoring should be established, monitoring of over procurement practices, construction process, and also integrity and corruption prevention. These are three areas, focus areas for this monitoring. And some independent and reputable agencies shall be engaged to perform this monitoring, and the separate concept of monitoring shall be developed together with the international partners. Well, for the emergency procedure, the procedure is simplified here because time is of the essence. There could be like softer requirements for the registration in DREAM. It could be post factum registration, and this decision could be made based on the direct initiatives of the sectoral ministry of the local authorities without this procedure at the intergovernmental working group part. But it should be important that emergency expenditure procedure could be initiated in a very limited number of cases predetermined in the regulation. So what are the next steps? We need to draft relevant regulations and put all those ideas in place into a formal legal act. Once the Parliament approves for the state budget for the next year, all these regulations would be adopted, implemented, and well, starting January, the updated fund with the improved processes could start working. Thank you.
Дякую, Олександра Азархіна.
Thank you, Alexandra Azarkina. It's hard to choose the language. So first of all, I would like to thank the European Union Anti-Corruption Initiative and the colleague from Basel Institute for their work.
Okay, anti-corruption language. Good job. So basically, we do just appreciate and we're very grateful for the work which experts did. Frankly speaking, for me personally, it was a challenge because imagine when you are acting as a public servant, I'll say it in Ukrainian, у межах та спосіб.
In the way and within the means.
New rules, new practices, totally new instruments, and in the same time, you need to work in an existing frame. And every time I'm saying that we were using the fund for the liquidation, the consequences of the armed aggression as a testing field, part of me just over-reading different, like a law enforcement bodies' letters to me saying what you've done. Because basically, the truth is that we were reforming and running. We knew from the beginning that we are committed to transparency, accountability, proper planning and allocation, which is also part of the corruption prevention policies, but we knew that we're going to make mistakes. And I know that our strength and the most strongest position in the way we were working with the fund was the way we made it in a very inclusive way, the way we were trying to put as much as possible data-driven solutions into the system, the way we were making it on the transparency at each level, but at the same time, we knew that we need to be better. And that's why it was our own initiative to invite the experts and to analyze the fund. We also have here Martina Boguslavec somewhere who also did quite a good research and analysis of the fund. And we also used her recommendations. And now I do believe when we did such a job as a government, together with civil society, together with the partners, we need to make it better, and we need to make sure that such good practices will prevail. And we will not continue any bad examples of the non-transparent or not properly allocated or not properly planned activities. So thank you very much. That was just the gratefulness words. Thank you, Alan.
Дякую, Олександра.
Thank you, Alexandra. I saw also the words of thanks to Mr. Alan Park Christensen, head of the EU ACI.
Great honor for me to be here today, and a great honor for our program, the UACI, to co-host this event together with you, Deputy Minister Sakina. I think the presentation we just heard from Juhani from the Bars Institute and Irina from the Integrity Support Group, I think gave quite some clear recommendations as to the way forward in creating a fund that will live up to all these important values of transparency, integrity and accountability. And I think we must admit that we don't have that kind of fund today for reconstruction purposes. And basically it's about creating trust to the reconstruction framework, trust among Ukrainians, international partners, and therefore this work is so important, and we are happy to assist. Let me just mention 3 points that we find are especially important in this work. Firstly, we believe that all reconstruction projects, and I'm not thinking about the emergency projects that we also need somehow to deal with that Irina mentioned, but all the reconstruction projects as such should be selected, and funds should be allocated in a transparent manner. No matter which budget line or budget fund that will be used. Secondly, it's important that the reconstruction funds available will be allocated to the projects that are most important. We need to have this mechanism of prioritization of projects in place. It needs to be an objective mechanism. And it should be obligatory for all reconstruction projects. And then finally, thirdly, the project selection and management process should be part of the DREAM system. We think that's the only way to ensure maximum transparency and accountability throughout the process. One thing, of course, is the fund, and in the reconstruction process, that this is where we start. It's from here budget is allocated to specific projects. But then new challenges emerge. I think we're all aware that on each level of the reconstruction process, there are risks, and we need to mitigate those risks. I believe that especially in the field of public procurement, these risks are actually quite worrisome. We know that much of the reconstruction will be carried out at the local level, and the Agency of Restoration will draw on its, I think, 24 regional divisions throughout Ukraine. They were created to build roads and bridges, and now they will be in charge of reconstruction. And of course, for that they need support, and they need capacity building, and they need a lot of assistance in implementing policies and regulations in order to close gaps for corruption. And here we are assisting, we are developing an anti-corruption program for the divisions. We are assisting with improving the procurement procedures. We are providing training, and together with the agency we are going to do even more to assist at this local level. I think just my final words would be that, when addressing the corruption risks in the whole reconstruction process, one needs to have this holistic approach. It's not enough to have a fund that is transparent and live up to the best practices. We need to have the whole way throughout till the reconstruction is somehow made in reality. The school is built, or the hospital or house. We need all the way through to check where do we see these holes for corruption that we need to close. So that's why the fund is only one brick in the wall of many others that we need to address. I would like to thank the Ministry and the agency for the good work you're doing. I think it's so important that we don't only talk about values, and we don't only talk about this holistic approach, but you actually prepare some concrete proposals and actions that will lead in that direction. So thanks a lot for that. And with those words, I mean, thanks for your attention, and I look forward to the next panel. Thank you.
Дякую дуже.
Thank you very much. And now is the time to give the floor to the experts, to hear expert conclusions on how we can improve financial transparency and effectiveness of the recovery system. And I give the floor to Yevhen Apalkov, Senior Legal Advisor of the Reform Support Team, and at the Ministry of Communities, Anatoly Tkachuk, expert in regional development and state regional policy, and Gleb Vyshlinsky, Executive Director of the Center for Economic Strategy. Please. We are now going to see Yevhen's presentation.
Today I will be talking about the new development under the Ukraine Facility Regulation, in particular regarding the 15% for the recovery, reconstruction, and modernization needs of Ukraine dedicated to Ukraine's subnational authorities. That's the recent development in the text of the regulation that resulted from the voting of the European Parliament. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Before actually talking about a financial administration of the 15%, I will set a background by explaining why a single project pipeline under the Fund for Liquidation was set up in 2023, how the recovery budgetary facility can be a financial vehicle for the 15% funding, and in addition to that, I will also outline the development of Ukraine cohesion policy and how it can be incorporated in the project selection and financial administration of the overall. And also I'll end up with the high-level process flow. That you can see the text of Article 6 of the regulation resulted from the voting in the European Parliament. So you can see that 15% was added to the Chapter 3 of the regulation. Chapter 3 of the regulation, that's the part dedicated to the non-repayable financial support of the European Union. So currently the text reads that 15% of overall Chapter 3 funding is for the recovery, reconstruction, modernization needs of Ukraine's subnational authorities, such as regions, cities, and local communities. And also in the regulations recital, there is an explanation on why it was actually envisaged in that form under Article 6. And you can see that the focus is on supporting the multiple roles that Ukraine's regional and local authorities play. And that's the reason that this narrative, it goes at the moment through the text of the regulation. Just a basic flow of the disbursement regarding pre-financing disbursement and regular disbursement provided under Ukraine's facilities. So that's just to set up the background. So you can see that there is a pre-financing that is to the level of 7% of the non-repayable financial support, and there are also regular quarterly disbursement based on the quantitative and qualitative achievements with reference to the Ukraine's plan. Also, in this regard, it is important to outline Article 6 2E requirements. That's requirements for Ukraine regarding the development of the Ukraine's plan. So you can see, for instance, in Para 1 that there is an emphasis on the actual recovery, reconstruction, and modernization needs. And that actually corresponds to the changes that I outlined earlier regarding the Article 6. I'll try to explain how it is important, why it is important for the regional and local levels, and I'll do that with reference to the RDNA 1 and RDNA 2. So that's the basic regional statistics that was gathered for the regional and local projects. And you can see that a significant part of those projects, the needs were significantly increased with regard, for instance, for housing. That is particularly dedicated to the local and regional needs. And also we have significant increase in healthcare and education. Just a small remark in this regard. I'm talking about RDNA2, meaning that the RDNA2, the recent one, assessment, it covers the period between February 2022 and February 2023. So the recent development resulted, for instance, from the terror attacks of the Russian Federation on Ukraine's port infrastructure. They are not reflected in this statistical data. Overall, you can see that the damages also increased significantly sector by sector. Just a bit of background, their DNA assessment, they operate three categories. They talk about damage, they talk about losses, and they talk about needs. So on this slide, you can see the actual increase of needs of damage between two assessments. And that's actually a very important slide with regard to the regional and local development, because it shows that between two assessments, the significant increase of damages in a particular regions of Ukraine. While some regions, like the Kiev region, for instance, that was suffered significantly during the early days of full-scale invasion, there was a possibility for it to recover. So just to remind that the yellow graph is the actual RDNA1, while the I think it's the black one, that's RDNA2. So some regions, they are on the path to recovery, where there are other regions still suffer significantly. That's the reason why actually in 2023 the fund for the liquidation, that was emergency response budgetary facility, was set up. It was set up and it had and has two sources of income. So it's frozen and nationalized assets of the Russian Federation, sanctioned assets, and 15% of the passive income of the National Bank of Ukraine. And it's important to outline in this regard that as a source of income for this emergency budgetary facility, no international funding was provided. So this fund was not able to receive any international financial support, like grants or repayable financial support. And earlier today, we also heard that there will be no funding for this fund in 2024. So there will be basically no money that can be dedicated to the implementation of the projects under the mandate of this fund. And finally, when we talk about the fund for the liquidation of the consequences of the armed aggression, it is important to outline the IMF approach to this fund. Overall, and you can see it here, in the recent IMF review, there was positive feedback on the fund. So it was set up that it followed all legal and regulatory provisions, and in addition to that, it had additional layer of transparency. So that's actually how Ukraine provided emergency response to the regions and local authorities in 2023, and still doing so. So I'll cover basic statistics of this fund for the regional and local projects. So overall, there were almost 400 projects, and you can see, and it is very visible, so we have this crescent where the regions that suffered from the military activities and the territories of which were under temporary occupation, they received funding for the bigger number of projects, while the regions in the center and east west of Ukraine, some projects were funded, but not that significant number of those. So overall fund by total and average. Why it is important? It is important to show that the main, with regard to the regional and local project, the main recipients were the housing projects, followed by the education. We are talking about schools, and after that, healthcare, water, and other facilities. And on average, it should be emphasized here, so we're talking about simple average. So the simple average for the projects funded from the fund, it was about $1 million US dollars. That's distribution of funding by the regions with regard to the number of the financial support provided for the regions. That's just a couple of projects that were funded from the fund as an example. So here you can see a school in Lizarivka village that was funded, the reconstruction of which is currently funded from the fund. And the school, once the project is commissioned, it will be able to accommodate 192 pupils. Another example, if it's the multi-apartment housing in a European city, the funding from the fund for the liquidation amounts for nearly 9 million euro for that. And you can see that the construction is actually in progress now. That's the Chernigovo water pumping plant that is also funded from the fund for the liquidation. And also you can see that the reconstruction of this facility is also on its way. And finally, of overall almost 400 projects, we wanted to show you that there are some small projects, for instance, like a healthcare center in one of the villages in Kharkiv region. So when we talk about a particular project or a particular process, it is important to highlight the lesson learned from its administration. So the lesson learned from the administration of the fund is that, considering the number of projects, it is very important to have a coherent single project pipeline with the unified rules. So all projects follow the same rules related to the selection, prioritization, and actual procurement, monitoring, and commissioning. And just a background to that, I earlier emphasized that there were almost 400 projects funded, but overall the long list of projects that were applied to the fund, it was much longer. So it was very important to have this unified selection and prioritization methodology to swift through that. The other lesson learned is that the permanent budgetary facilities should be set up to actually do the disbursement for such projects. Because fund for the liquidation that is operational this year, it is set up in the law of the state budget for this year, and for the next year there will be no money in that. So the position is that such a permanent budgetary facility should be a part of the budgetary code, because the budgetary code set up the framework for the operation of public finance, while the budget law set up the framework for one particular year. The third lesson learned, and it is very important because it relates to the actual communication with the international partners, is that international partners overall are very hesitant to work with the budgetary facility that has the sanction and nationalized Russian assets in that. And the position in this regard is that until there is a global consensus related to the Russian frozen assets, there will be this hesitance to provide international funding to the budgetary facility that has one of the sources of its funding, the frozen Russian assets. And the third lesson is actually the follow-up of the earlier discussion, is that since there is no funding provided for...
Євгене, я перепрошую, ми заслухалися, а в певний момент...
I'm sorry. It's a beautiful presentation, but we are mesmerized, but the time is running, and it is running up.
And its capacity support. So Ukraine is currently working on its cohesion policy, its state regional development strategy. It is the strategy that will set up the basis for the addressing the discrepancies between different regions resulted from the full-scale Russian invasion. And this regional development strategy will be a part of the project/election methodology. So it will be one of the criteria that the project will be assessed on. We are working on the recovery budgetary facility, and that's the actual mission, values, and vision and goals for that. Recovery budgetary facility can be set up as the ring-fence funding vehicle, meaning that, for instance, 15% funding provided by the European Union can be secured and dedicated only to the recovery, reconstruction, and modernization needs of Ukraine, subnational authorities, such as regions and territorial communities. Finally, it's not working. Could you, next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So if we talk about ring fence funding, the process flow will be a distribution of funding under Chapter 1, where the 85% will be dedicated to the general part of the state budget, while the 15% will be dedicated to the recovery budgetary facility that will disburse this money to the Ukraine subnational authorities. And basically that's the similar thing for the regular disbursement. And finally, there is a blueprint of the process flow of how it can be managed in general. So overall, regarding the 15% funding, it should follow the requirements of the regulation, in particular Article 16, with the full reporting, monitoring, and auditing as required by the European Commission. Thank you.
Дякую, Євгене.
Thank you, Eugene. Halib Bushlinsky, Executive Director of the Center for Economic Strategy. Unfortunately, we cannot hear Halib. A big problem in its own right. No input. Thank you very much. We've seen things presented, and for preparation of DREAM system, different interfaces that we utilize, and other partners from the ministries. Well, this is a great standard in its own standing, and transparency, as we agreed, should be across the board, but the special focus given to the international project, we can see that we have to make considerable efforts sometimes for the projects implemented by the international donors, not through the Ukrainian government, are continuously funded, and any attempts to get information on them can also be met with certain difficulty and opposition. That does not necessarily mean that there is corruption there, but we base our judgment on the stereotypes of high corruption in Ukraine, and that's how we perceive such project management. So now we are setting the bar at a very big height for the system that is being created and fulfilled. And now the most active discussions are around corruption, but and also an effective use of funds. The most important thing that I read in this presentation, and the things that we can already see in the reports that we have for liquidation of the after effects, this is a lot of understanding where the money is spent and how we can manage the problems and the irregularities with submission of projects, and where we have no practical recovery or satisfying the needs in the regions that have so far never experienced any Russian aggression, but require some additional facilities for IDPs, not necessarily as a result of direct impacts. And it is also important, equally important, to coordinate the efforts, and for that with the international partners, because we understand that no matter how strong the will is, we cannot channel this all through one pipeline, and we have to prioritize and appreciate the throughput for all the projects and all the funds used in Ukraine for the purposes of recovery restoration. Then we have more opportunities for analysis and correct decision making. Now, as I have already mentioned, with the EU, we have another project for recovery and reconstruction and restoration of Ukraine. And the beautiful thing about it is the opportunity to analyze the trends starting from regional, sectoral, and this provides the opportunity to hold discussions at promoted levels, not just boiling it down to I and nine. Well, this is not a matter of just singing praises. Well, we have to be very substantial with information received from all the donors. Eugene was presenting, and in fact, this is one of the ways to channel that partially from the facility for restoration, and the Vice Prime Minister was discussing a reaction to the change or shift of priorities for the budget of 2024. And I think that we still need, in the first place, to appreciate, to evaluate the achievements with the mechanism available from the point of view of transparency, analytical ability, controllability for decision-making with the scarce resources that we still have at our command, and they will be scarce anyway, no matter whether we want them to be spent in an ad hoc mode through the reserve fund or be a more regular affair. And the last point I would like to draw attention to is the fact that with all the challenges and prioritization and the use of resources available in Ukraine, the war, the victory, the recovery, or social protection for that matter, the second front that we have, it's the first one actually. This is increasing the availability of resources for all the goals in question, because we can spend as much effort as we wish redistributing. But if we have no additional streams from the frozen assets, we have, of course, the first step is to use income from that. But it does not mean that this should be delayed till further notice. With the Russian assets and the interest on them, both sources, by and large, mean confiscation, simply. And we can play with legal lingo here, but this is the use of aggressors' money to repair the damage for Ukraine. And we have to concentrate our efforts on, because I didn't like that part in Eugene's presentation, that statement that never these lawyers would come to terms, because lawyers are such animals that they can seek proof something that is impossible to prove, or defenses and protections that are impossible to establish. So this is taxpayers' money from our partner countries, and we understand that our tax revenues are very limited and should be used for the war and the situation we are in. Thank you very much. Thank you. Our next speaker is Anatoly Tkachuk, and he also has a presentation to share. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I've never dealt in anti-corruption activities, and this is my first opportunity to contribute to this mission. And I've listened to many speakers and have this queer impression. lieutenants and captains who would like to become captains and mayors listen to us, because each time we have the reshuffling in the political leadership, the openings crop up for lieutenants and captains, and they start prosecuting their predecessors. And such prosecution or persecution is actually caused by the chaos in our documentation. And you can always find a flea in that mane, so to speak, leadership and protocol. In the conditions of war, leadership comes first. Fast-track decision-making. With the war, we have no protocols to stick to after the active phase. Lieutenants and captains will appear again saying that the funds are spent incorrectly. We are discussing restoration as a partial affair. For partial restoration project management is very good, but talking about systemic revival, we have to discuss planning. Let's look on this pattern. At the local level especially, there is a strategy and the concept for integrated development, twin documents, and we have the spatial development plan, comprehensive recovery plan, and restoration plan, and this should be all and then translated into a set of documents, the guidelines for regional policy. It's all supposed to be planned.
There is a law on regulating of urban planning activities, but there is also the regulation of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, which sets out the rules how for planning, for program design, and we see that the plan is designed on the basis of the program, which is not obligatory, and the plan will be funded 6 months after the martial law is lifted. I cannot figure out what is what. I cannot understand what is going on. I'm worried about my friends in territorial communities that must do something in this situation. Here, please look at the map. It is good when we talk that all across Ukraine we need to have the same requirements to everyone, but unfortunately the territory of Ukraine looks asymmetrical. That first red line along the Russian-Ukrainian Belarusian border, this 5-kilometer zone, this is the gray zone where you cannot live. But if you multiply these 5 kilometers by 3,000 kilometers, we will get a huge territory that is no longer habitable and is no longer part of the economy of Ukraine. But in some places there are people. So the question arises, what do we do with the restoration, with the renovation of these territories? The next line is 30 kilometers. This is the most dangerous line on considering the artillery threat, and the existence of economy is really dangerous. It's dangerous to live there. Multiply 30 kilometers by 3,000 and you get 90,000 kilometers of Ukrainian territory. And then dark yellow line, 100 kilometers. This is a huge zone. This is the front itself. And next is the central Ukraine. And then we have the rest of Ukraine. And we need to have a clear situation concerning the planning, where we can plan for the comprehensive systemic renovation and recovery, and where we need to help people just leave these territories. And now look at some of these photos. On the top photo, you see the broken roof and windows. It's easy to make decisions. It's clear how many broken windows, and what tiles should be replaced. And the next photo was taken next to Chernihiv. This is a completely destroyed house. There is no simple solution here to just rebuild it. Here we need some project decision, how to rebuild it, but maybe we need some spatial decisions whether to rebuild it at all. Down below you see Mariinka. A whole city is practically destroyed. What do we do with this city? Who makes political decisions concerning the ways of rebuilding or non-rebuilding? So we are coming back from anti-corruption to planning. We need a clear, understandable system for planning at every macro region, front one, and center another, and the back and another. So we need this prioritization in the system, because there are issues. When we talk about some same projects, that's one thing, but if we talk about a systemic recovery, then that's another thing entirely. So there is no automatic prioritization possible. So this is where the role of expert community increases, which should provide solutions for politicians, because these would be political solutions. We are rebuilding the whole city or parts of it, or we are recultivating the lands. Those are difficult decisions, but these decisions must be taken. My colleague mentioned 15% of the funds from the European facility for Ukraine. So this funds cannot be concentrated in one sector or in one branch. So I think we could suggest the combined scheme, part of the funding as subventions to support and maintain the infrastructure if there is. Then the local self-governance will not be able to support the infrastructure, and that would mean, like, in 4 years this infrastructure would be no more. Part of this funding should be allocated to the infrastructure, part of it allocated to the regions to support the strategy for the development of regions, and the third part in support for the state strategy for regional development to resolve some key issues, and maybe another part to allocate to important national projects that will influence all the regions. For example, rapid motorways, and to support the development of the regions which are now blocked. So this is not about corruption. It's not whether 10% or 50% was used inefficiently. 50% would mean a disaster, but it might happen if we fail to assess correctly, if we fail to forecast what is going to happen in the region, if we fail to assess correctly what needs to be rebuilt and what should not be, and whether the people will come back to those places where we invested a lot of money for reconstruction. This is my opinion. Anatoly, the very first example that you gave, that you showed on the screen, how to rebuild because there was, for example, asbestos in the roof. So whether to install solar panels or any other technology, even if the first decision is not easy. So what can we then say about the system as a whole? And I know because I was a part of the discussion on systematization and unification of all the project planning documents. And Irina Kovalenka and Alexandra Azarkina are smiling. They know what I'm talking about. We need to make the lives for our communities easier, to make these solutions systemic and clear, how we design these planning documents, and maybe to combine them and have them in the digital system. On behalf of the organizers, I was asked to invite you to the lunch and to continue the informal discussion. And for the final word, I would like to give the floor to Alexandra. I was hoping for a discussion, but we will continue this discussion informally during our lunch. I would like to, first of all, thank you all again, because these slides demonstrate the work of multiple teams. And I think that the last discussion is the most important, because this would provide for the deepest expert analysis. We talk about a variety of focal points. We talk about the macro level and micro level, and we talk about the Ukrainian facility, about our capabilities to make investments, to then be able to earn money to prepare for the accession to the EU. So this was a very important presentation, and Yevgen representing the team for the support of reforms of the ministry. We will send these materials to the participants, and we will invite you to engage in this process. So what was the logic, what we wanted to build? Yes, we started our discussion with the fact that we need to somehow protect those investments concerning the reconstruction and recovery, because we need, again, to ensure transparency and accountability of all the processes. We're talking about the necessity of proper planning. So when we come to the planning documentation, we, together with our colleague Anna Yurchenko, representative of the IMF, we showed how this process from the setting up priorities and implementing projects looks like. If we fail to foresee some planning, then our work will never catch up with our priorities, no matter how hard we try. This is the logic itself for a normal infrastructure project that should follow and the good governance standards. And we see, and also we need to focus on specific investments to, again, be able to provide guarantees at a local, regional, and central level to make sure that the plans will be implemented and they won't stay on paper. And then we need financial tools. This was the section where we talked about the possibility of use of those 15% that should be allocated for the recovery at the local and regional level. So if we design the strategy for local and regional development. So here we are opening a discussion as to how the state strategy for regional development development could be the basis to respond to the questions of local, regional, and also those projects that influence the local and regional development. And we see this opportunity here. So we need to go deeper. These are complex, comprehensive issues, but we already have mechanisms. And what I would like to emphasize here is when we set the question how to ensure transparent, accountable, well-planned recovery, we in fact are talking about what the state policy is. The reforms, the most serious ones, started after the Maidan, and then we had the preparation that was done for our Euro integration. So we are now active in the environment where we should at the same time work on the go and work within the framework of our current legislation. So thank you all for this discussion. I would like to see this discussion continue, to see other experts engaging in this discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alexandra, and we invite you to lunch, to the informal discussions.